sky. That's the masses.
3, 2, 1. Welcome back to Gimme Some Truth, a.k.a. Dame la Verdad. For those of you watching on YouTube, kind of a pattern-filled morning here with Stan, who not only has some Sedona-themed, I think we could call that, top. It also is matched up with your shirt underneath it, right? You have more of that pattern going on underneath. Yes. What I will say as well, if you're watching on the YouTube, I'm wearing camouflaged pants. And what I will say is frequently Stan would put these two things together, but he's decided to go a little more tasteful on his pants today. A little quieter.
It's kind of a wintry little day. We got like snow on the trees and on the ground, and I was just dreaming of Sedona this morning and thought, why not look like I was smart enough to have a winter home in the Southwest.
Yeah, a little high desert air would be nice. We are also recording to you from our new studio. We are no longer on the corner of Glenway and Monroe. The international team has been moved to kind of a new location. We're not very far away from Glenway and Monroe. We can still get you to the chocolate company, I think, Madison Chocolate Company, if need be, our neighbors over there. But the international team, because we're on calls and doing things like recording podcasts all the time, we are now in a little satellite office, which is great. So, if you ever get to Madison, feel free and stop by and visit us at either our old digs or our new digs. We're moving between the two. We haven't totally abandoned Monroe Street, and they'll be coming over here from there to record podcasts as well. So this week we're going to be doing a little Dites-moi la vérité, Dame la verdad, or as they say in Portugal, the kind of subject of this week's podcast. Stan, how would you, you're the Portuguese speaker. How do you say give me some truth in Portuguese?
Fala verdade, something like that.
Yep.
It's close to Dame la verdad.
Yep.
La verdad.
Just with a more
with a different accent.
Exactly. So, to quote the late Donald Rumsfeld, going into kind of last couple of months, and I think we first started posting about it back in September, October, there were changes coming to the NHR program, and they fell under what Donald Rumsfeld once infamously or famously called known unknowns. We knew something was coming. We just didn't know what it was going to look like, how it was going to play with current legislation, so on and so forth. And so finally, the political situation in Portugal has also been unstable. So finally, we're starting to get some clarity. So from the big picture, Stan, what has transpired in Portugal over the last couple of months since we last recorded this podcast, just in terms of politics?
Yeah, I mean it's been tumultuous to say the least, and it's been quite fascinating. After the Labor Day weekend, I believe it was, when the president or Prime Minister Costa, I should say, went on television and announced that NHR could no longer continue because of the tax injustices it had created. This was in response to people very upset about the gentrification of their communities by foreigners. Essentially, the demand for real estate had, inflated prices. Frankly, inflationary pressures, throughout the world have been, the theme for the last couple of years, of course, right? But anyway, Costa announced this without any real specifics, and then that created somewhat of a vacuum as to how this was going to unfold, and then to complicate matters even further.
Well, I know what I'll say. Our advice at that time was, if you're thinking, now go.
You
gotta pull the trigger now.
Yeah, don't wait around. And if you're kind of kicking the tires on it for a couple of years down the line, it's probably not going to happen for you, right?
Yep.
The NHR program, and that's held true as things have evolved. But interestingly enough, I mean, after Costa announces this broad sea change of immigration and tax policy, he is caught up in a scandal that involved, bribery and corruption with regards to lithium mining and some other interests, and his chief of staff is arrested, and that day he resigns from office, saying, "I done nothing wrong, but feel free to investigate. I'm not above the law," which I find refreshing as an
Indeed.
American. I find this terribly refreshing.
I'm not above the law.
I'll
as a
resign
criminal
before
defense.
I've ever even been accused of anything. And by the way, I'm not above the law.
Now, we should also note that this sort of corruption, for those of you who are thinking about going, not unheard of in Portugal. I can give you examples of communities where corruption has led to building approvals being delayed and so on and so forth. So this is not uncommon theme in Portuguese politics, we could say.
Well, yeah, I mean, historically, we've got a country that's now calling, tax incentives for people to immigrate there to be tax injustice. But the existing president of the country has boldly and profoundly suggested that Portugal might need to apologize for the slave trade.
Oh. So yeah, they're moving forward.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, well, why not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, clean slate.
Yeah. And so this president also did something more directly relevant to their current politics.
So I, not exactly something that you get in social studies in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I went to high school. But apparently they have a president who has the power. Once the prime minister resigned, he had the power to dissolve parliament and call for elections. Elections are going to be in March. Now, he did this before anything got ironed out about what this end of NHR would look like or what, would take its place, right? So he announced this with the proviso that this existing parliament needed to, as one last act, approve a budget for 2024, which, as an American, I also find refreshing.
We got to get the budget done
A congressional
by a certain
budget
date. Yeah.
must be done.
Yeah.
How about that?
By the way, I was just going to comment that was proviso a word that you picked up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, by the way.
It could be.
Yeah. So
It could be.
They have to come up with a budget. And one of the big, obviously, things, again, refreshing, involved in the Portuguese budget is tax policy, who gets taxed what, how they get taxed, so on and so forth. And a big component of that is the NHR, which is both an immigration and a tax kind of deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, yes, right? I mean, technically, the NHR is a tax incentive program for people that have achieved an immigration status, but they go hand in hand together, right? So as we see tax policy becoming, less friendly less encouraging for foreigners to move to Portugal, you also see, the brushback on immigration policy, such as the availability of golden visa or what you have to do to qualify to attain tax residency in the first place, right?
And so what did they so we've got now, they have to do this, budget by basically the end of the year. They finally
get it done at the end of November.
Yep. Again, refreshing, no late night, kind of things. And then as well, the president has declared, okay, we're going to do a new parliamentary election in 2024.
Correct.
So what did they decide in these, meetings that, what are we going to do about NHR? What are the, kind of highlighted points?
So synopsis here, I mean, and there's still a lot of, details that we don't have, but effectively the NHR program is over after 2023 with some exceptions, right? The Parliament, bless their hearts, recognized that there were some people that were very deep into the process, right? So effectively, the standard where you're in for sure, and if you're in, you're grandfathered. You get the 10 years of incentives, right?
Yeah, we should stress as well that if you're already there, they're not taking away your NHR status, correct?
Right.
They're not all of a sudden kicking you out or making you overnight pay Portuguese taxes when you thought you had this kind of 10-year abatement. They're not doing anything so draconian, but
Right.
they're putting a stop on it basically for the next budgetary year starting January 1st.
Right. So effectively, if you have achieved tax residency by the end of this year, you're in, right? For sure.
So that means, by the way, if you haven't gotten all your paperwork together, I would have done it 3 months ago, but get your paperwork in, get that declared, do it, get it straightened away. Because I'm guessing, the holiday season in Portugal, they're not working real fast.
As I read through this, I think to myself, through every little exception that, wow, that would have been very useful information to know exactly when Costa back, in September announced that this would be ending. Yep. Instead, this all comes out in a budget at the end of November, and they're like, well, there are these exceptions. And, a lot of them were like, well, now you tell us, it's great for those people who, got in under, but like, is it actionable now? And the answer is largely no, right? So, if you haven't become a tax resident by now, to get it in this 4-week window, could be challenging. But if you're out there and you're right at the finish line, maybe, my greatest hope would be that if this helps one person, then we've accomplished more than 99.9% of all podcasts in the history of humanity. Right?
We're going to talk about goats later.
Yeah. So, and if this ends up helping you, please like and subscribe to our channel. Let's just get that out there right
Which
now.
is now compliance approved.
Yes.
You can say that on the podcast.
So become a tax resident by the end of the year. Apply for NHR status and get that status approved by the end of March of next year. All of this was in a blog that we put out, just a few weeks ago. Before the finals were out, we knew that was going to be the case. Yep. Now there are certain exceptions for people and household members who don't become tax residents until 2024. There's still hope. There's still a path forward.
And so what are those exceptions? What is that sort of path forward for?
Okay, so they recognize that some people make life-changing plans in 2023 that don't quite get effectuated until 2024. So that's the theme here, right? So if you entered into an employment agreement or a promissory employment agreement dated no later than December 31st, 2023, there's still time to get out there and interview, apparently, under which the work shall be performed in Portugal. Then you can get in.
So this is essentially, this carve-out is basically making the case, if you're familiar with Spain, kind of transferring the Beckham rule to Portugal, right?
Yes, in a
if
way.
you signed your contract for Porto,
Yes.
The interesting thing here is what happens about the winter transfer window. But if you signed your,
I think you're screwed because that doesn't open until January.
Yeah. So, but what happens? Hey, I signed this agreement on December 15th to go move to Portugal, work for a Portuguese company.
Right.
You're fine.
You've probably quit your job in El Segundo and you're moving to Porto. Yep. This is a decent, we understand that you've made this commitment to Portugal and we're not going to turn our backs on you entirely.
But if you're employed, right? So it's for people who are employed workers. And it has to be more or less a Portuguese company.
Yes, exactly. So other exception.
Telefónica de Portugal or whatever.
Other exception is, okay, if you've entered into a rental or similar agreement, right? So you've committed to Portugal and you've gone out there. This is part of the immigration process, obviously, right? Is I have a place to live if I come there, and I've got it under contract. So if you've got a rental contract in place, interesting deadline here. This has to have been signed before October 10th of 2023. Okay, so I'm not sure why October 10th and not the 11th or the 15th or, frankly, Halloween, right? But October 10th, to use a Portugal-based property. So if you've already, gone through the steps of committing to rent a place in Portugal by the 10th of October, you're going to get grandfathered in. But you got to complete the other steps of tax residency and applying for an HR and all those things, of course. But you can do that in 2024 and not by the end of the year.
And so I think the case where this really comes in as well is there's a lot of new construction in Portugal. People may have put money down on a place by October 10th. It'll take a while for that construction to be completed. It being Portugal, probably longer than you might imagine. And when it's finally completed, you can still move in and still take advantage of this NHR, right?
Yeah.
As a kind of example.
Yeah. And if you've, a lot of people, they're going to rent their place in advance because it's part of the application process. The application process takes months, right? And a lot of people, by the way, to get into NHR, they end up renting a place months before they can actually move into it.
Yep.
So that's part of the costs of, that's part of the admission process. That's the dues you got to pay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Or a rent to buy, or yes, we've entered in this agreement, but
something
the
a
closing
little more permanent than rent.
But the closing, the closing date is until January 1st or something like that. That would,
exactly. Okay. So the last exception that I find fascinating that is somewhat intentionally vague is that Madera and the Azores, right? These tropical island paradises that are technically part of Portugal, but always somewhat autonomous, right? They will be able to grant NHR benefits to new residents even after 2024. So this is going to go, quite possibly, theoretically, this could go on forever. Right?
In those two islands, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly.
On those two islands.
Right.
And one of the things we were talking about beforehand, you said, well, calmate, don't jump in, don't rush into, Madera and the Azores, because from what you explained to me is essentially they have to update their laws regionally. That, this NHR was a federal law, that those two parliaments, their local parliaments, as we'll call them, need to, their county board, if you want, need to basically sit down and put into place what their requirements for NHR are going to be going forward, and they could elect to do nothing, right?
That's exactly right. So, it seems to me that, on the one hand, they could just effectively, take the 2009 program and say, well, we want to continue it, right? So they could make it that simple. And the local legislative bodies could just ratify that and say, we're going to continue with the program. Or they could screw with it, right? And they could make it either, more or less attractive in certain respects or hone in on certain, demographics that are more appealing to them, right? As islands that are pretty kickbacked and relaxed, I think it's great. Everything about the new incentives, which we could talk about a little bit, leave no room for digital nomads that want to work from their laptops on the beach, or retirees, right? A very important component of the people who flocked to Portugal because of NHR, right? So you still have these little footprints of places that are technically Portugal, that technically might give you a pathway to EU citizenship, right? Even if you are a retiree, because the new incentive programs, which remain vague, for the most part, are designed, whether they're going to be successful or not, it will be interesting to see, but they're very much designed towards high-end scientific and technical skilled type people who come to Portugal to work, like, think, the new Silicon Valley or Basel, where we have
and so to kind of address that, right? There are a couple of exceptions, right, that they mention. One is for scientists,
right. So there's an agency that approves certain types of jobs, right? And there always was in the existing NHR, but the existing NHR had things like artists and artisans and all kinds of different, areas, right?
Yep.
This new incentive tax scheme or ITS program is, seems much more honed in at high-tech, advanced skills, almost like PhD level stuff. So just working for a tech company isn't going to do it.
Yeah, and in fact, we spoke about digital nomads. One of the exceptions, one of the carve-outs is for startups, but it's not a clear out for, I work for a startup in California, right?
Correct. So you have to have, if you have a startup, you have to basically have some kind of registration as a Portuguese entity, or you have to have at least 25 employees working in Portugal, right? So that's hardly digital nomad territory.
Yeah. And, it has to be a company smaller than 25, but it basically has to be a Portuguese startup. And I think if you look at how this works now, what they're trying to do is incentivize maybe companies to move to Portugal.
Yes.
Science to move to Portugal, support the infrastructure of Portugal, less so just one-off bringing people in, turning it into Costa del Sol 2.0, tax haven, that sort of thing, that they're really trying to now bring in infrastructure, bigger entities, right, as part of this NHR program in how they adjusted it going forward.
Yeah. And again, so nothing in the new program at all for, the some of the bigger, cohorts of people that were attracted to NHR.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. And what we'll say is now, one of our biggest groups were retirees, and it seems like it's become less
early retirees.
Yeah. Less of an enviable
semi-retirees.
Yeah.
I've got an LLC and I do consulting work, but I can do it anywhere in the world.
Yep.
A la, Portugal, NHR, great deal.
Yep. And kind of keeps your taxes a lot simpler and life a lot easier,
Yeah.
So that kind of deal has changed. Again, just to stress, if you are there, if you are an NHR, you've still got your clock. If you've, signed up for your tax residency, if you've done all of these things, you're great. So from that standpoint, less to worry about. We're going to have probably more details on some of this as it comes in. One thing we would encourage you, if you are thinking about digital nomadism, retiring abroad, any of those things, listen to some of our other podcasts, because there's still interesting places for folks to go that they may not realize are good deals, that they may not realize are interesting places to move. So there are lots of options still out there. So again, thank you for listening, viewing. Stan, what do you want to tell the people about smashing and all of that?
If you like the content that we provide here on Give Me Some Truth for Expats, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And if you have certain questions that obviously we talked about a lot of transitional changes in Portugal in broad strokes. If you have questions or comments or want to add in some further details that we couldn't cover in this short period of time, feel free to comment in the comment sections. The last time we talked about Portugal, we got a very lively discussion going on. You don't necessarily have to tell other people that they shouldn't print rubbish, not us, but like other comments, like, don't troll people, but we like to keep it, community and friendly oriented. We're all out there basically, to help people navigate this international global world, right?
Yeah, and while we know a lot, there's also stuff, again, the known unknowns. So feel free to fill in what you may know about the unknowns.
We'd love to hear from people. We try to keep our pulse on the ground in lots of different countries where we have clients. So we'd like to hear from you. So again, thanks for listening and viewing, and we'll catch up with you soon. And we're recording this at the beginning of December, so happy holidays and Happy New Year.
Wagner Condon Financial Advisors is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The opinions expressed by the participants of this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Wagner Condon Financial Advisors. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Viewers are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.
You gotta leave your money behind you. Raise your hand to the sky. Ask the masses for silence.